Some people are willing to give their last penny, to sell their home, to risk their career, even to sacrifice their life, and to receive nothing in return except for cold silence and cynicism. Tokyo, 2016. A case that divided the public. Sometimes sincere kindness is not met with gratitude. At times, you meet people who act so brazenly that they feel entitled to control the fates of others, as if someone's life is just a convenient tool. Use it and throw it away. Jiang was born in 1992. She was raised by her single mother, Dine Chulien. The woman had tried to build a family life with her husband in northeastern China, in a coastal city where the sea breeze smelled of salt and fish markets. However, the marriage fell apart shortly after the child's birth. The girl was not yet a year old. Her father simply packed his things and left, without explanation, without a second glance. Dine had always dreamed of moving to Japan, where she hoped to find a better life, a better job, a quieter life, perhaps even a new beginning. Now, these plans had to be frozen indefinitely. Her dreams were put on the back burner, next to youthful photographs and tickets that were never bought. Her biological father showed no interest in his daughter's fate. The man categorically refused to maintain any contact and provided no support. He changed his phone number, he didn't answer letters, he didn't stand in her way, but he also paid no child support. Diane Chulien was left completely free to make decisions concerning her child. On the one hand, no one interfered. On the other, she had to bear the entire burden alone, day after day, with no days off or vacations. Raising a daughter without help was not easy. Her mother worked 2 jobs. She left early in the morning and returned late at night. The girl wanted to spend more time with her, but she understood the situation. She wasn't capricious. She didn't demand too much. She often shared her dreams while sitting with her mother in the kitchen after dinner. To grow up, get a high-paying job, and build a career, so her family would never face financial difficulties again. So her mother could finally rest, so they wouldn't have to count every yuan. And from an early age, she began to act, not just talk, but do. In school, Jiang was a straight A student in all subjects. Teachers held her up as an example to other students. Her classmates were silently envious. The girl had an artistic gift and was passionate about anime. She could sit for hours with a pencil over a sheet of paper, drawing characters with the meticulousness of someone who sees the details. Her mother took her to extra classes to nurture her talent. She saved money on herself, putting a little aside from every paycheck just so her daughter could study. When her daughter reached high school, Jiang suggested she go to Japan, where the animation industry thrives the most, where studios look for talent, where one could build a real career, not just dream about it. To avoid language problems, Jiang enrolled in Japanese courses and began studying the language alongside her college studies. She studied in the evenings, on weekends. Sometimes she would fall asleep over her textbook, and her mother would cover her with a blanket, not daring to wake her. To give her daughter the opportunity to go to Tokyo, Dian Qilian had to sell her parents' house, the very house where she had grown up, where she remembered every crack in the wall, every creak of the floorboards. She bought a smaller apartment, much smaller. The difference was enough for a plane ticket to Japan and rent for her daughter for the first little while. Just enough for the young woman to get on her feet, find a job, and start an independent life. For the first time in their lives, the mother and daughter, who had never been apart, were separated by distance. At the airport, Diane stood by the glass and watched the plane take off. She stood there for a long time, even after the plane had disappeared into the clouds. But the bond between them remained strong. They called each other daily and texted constantly. The mother asked about every little thing, what she ate, how she slept, if she was cold. The daughter answered in detail, knowing it reassured her. After moving in 2015, Jiang enrolled in a Tokyo language school, a small building in a residential area that smelled of coffee from a first-floor vending machine and old textbooks. She needed to bring her Japanese to the level required for admission to a local university's graduate program. The school had a dormitory where the young woman moved in, a room for two, narrow, with a window overlooking a courtyard where crows cawed in the morning. It was there she met Liu Xin. From the first few minutes of conversation, it was clear they had a lot in common. Both had arrived recently. Both missed home. Both were trying to find their footing in a foreign city where everything was different, from the food to the way people greeted each other. A friendship began that was destined to be fatal. The young women truly did have a lot in common. Both were from China and from the same city, Qingdao. Their families lived just a 20-minute drive from each other. Perhaps their mothers bought vegetables at the same market. Perhaps they had once stood in the same line at the clinic. The world turned out to be smaller than it seemed. Liu Xin had already been studying at the language school for a year, but she struggled with Japanese. The grammar was confusing. She forgot the characters. In class, she was often distracted, staring out the window. She still had a year left in her course, though her skill level was still noticeably inferior to that of her new acquaintance. Zhang mastered the material faster and showed more aptitude. She stayed after class, asked questions, and took extra notes. As a result, she completed the program at the same time as Liu Xin, in just 12 months. Yet her command of the language was significantly higher. The teachers noticed. Liu Xin noticed too, but she didn't let on. In 2016, both were accepted into graduate programs at different universities, just as they had planned. Despite studying separately, they spent most of their free time together. They cooked dinners in the tiny dormitory kitchen. They went for walks along the evening streets where neon lights reflected in the puddles. They shared their plans for the future. Zhang adapted successfully to Tokyo. She found a job at a small studio that worked on animation projects. Not the most prestigious, but it was steady. She managed her university workload. She got up at 6 in the morning to make it to both her studies and her job. She consciously chose the path of career and financial independence, putting relationships on the back burner. When her friends discussed boys, Jiang would stay quiet. She would just smile and shake her head. The young woman first wanted to achieve stability and bring her mother over, only then focusing on her personal life. She missed her mother deeply. Jiang called her every day, usually late at night when she came home tired, but she always called. She shared her news and successes. She told her about work, about being praised by a professor, about how she would soon be able to rent a better apartment. Her mother listened and believed. Soon they would be together. Liu Xin, meanwhile, wasn't particularly interested in working. She took odd jobs occasionally, without enthusiasm. She was inspired by other things. She had met a guy named Chen Shifeng. The young man was a year older. He spoke confidently. He had an intense gaze. The relationship started quickly. Too quickly, in hindsight. The friends continued to live under the same roof. Just 3 months later, Liu Xin's boyfriend moved in with them. Without asking Jiang, he just brought his things over one evening and stayed. Jiang said nothing at the time. She didn't want to ruin her relationship with her friend. Within a week, Jiang realized it had been a mistake. Chen Shifeng took up all the space. He talked loudly on the phone at night. He left dirty dishes. He looked at Jiang as if she were an intruder. He managed to convince his girlfriend to move out with him. He insisted that a third person in the apartment was in the way, that they needed their own space. Of course, this was just a pretext. Liu Xin agreed. Jiang understood. It was time for her to leave. After her friend moved out, Jiang rented a smaller, one-person apartment to save on rent. A room in an old building in the Nakano district. The wallpaper was peeling in places, but the housing was cheaper, and that mattered. Liu Xin soon realized her boyfriend had no intention of changing his harsh behavior. What had seemed like confidence turned out to be control. He checked her phone, demanded to know where she had been, who she had spoken to. He raised his voice for any reason. By the end of August 2016, the situation had escalated to a critical point. During another conflict, Chen grabbed Liu Xin's arm. He squeezed so hard that it left bruises. And he stared at her for a long time with a piercing gaze. He was silent, just staring. The young woman would later describe those eyes, full of a rage that needed no words. It was then she understood for the first time what her boyfriend was capable of, and she decided to break up. As is often the case with manipulators like Chen, he could not accept rejection. When Liu Xin came to pick up her things, he tried to forcibly keep her in the apartment. He locked the door, stood between her and the exit. The young woman managed to break free. She pushed him and ran. But her ex continued to pursue her on the street. He shouted after her, chased her. She had to call on neighbors for help to calm the man down. Only the threat of calling the police made him back down. He stopped, breathing heavily. Then he turned and left. But his gaze promised this was not the end. Freed from the toxic relationship, Liu Xin wanted to return to her best friend. She knew Jiang wouldn't say no. She never did. But now Jiang had a small apartment with a ban on additional tenants. The lease agreement was strict. Only one resident. Violate it, and you'd be evicted without a refund of the deposit. Nevertheless, Jiang couldn't refuse. She didn't know how. And so they decided to live together again, despite the risk. Diane Julian regularly came from China to visit her daughter, 2 or 3 times a year. Each time she brought something from home: dried fish, her daughter's favorite sweets, family photos. Because of this, Lu Xin couldn't move in right away. She had to spend a few nights at another student acquaintance's place. She waited for Jiang's mother to leave. On September 3rd, she finally moved into Jiang's apartment in the Nakano district. She brought 2 suitcases and a box of belongings. Jiang helped carry everything upstairs. Although the landlord strictly forbade subletting, the young woman decided to take the risk to help her friend. After all, her friend was in trouble, and that's what friends are for. Jiang's mother, who visited both young women, immediately noticed an unpleasant pattern. Her daughter's kindness was not reciprocated with gratitude. Lu Xin did nothing around the house. She didn't wash dishes. She didn't take out the trash. She didn't help Jiang and focused exclusively on her own affairs. She could lie on the sofa all day, scrolling through her phone, while Jiang cleaned the apartment after work. Even though her friend was risking her housing and facing eviction for her sake, the mother tried to talk to her daughter about it delicately, but Jiang just shrugged. "She's having a hard time right now. She's getting over a breakup. It will pass." It didn't. Meanwhile, Lu Xin's ex-boyfriend hadn't given up hope of getting her back. At first, he tried to win her over with gifts. He sent flowers to her workplace. He left boxes of candy at her dormitory door. Then he begged for a second chance and swore he would change. He wrote long messages at night, called 20 times in a row. Nothing worked. Lu Xin blocked his numbers, ignored his messages, didn't respond. Then the young man started to get angry. The tone of his messages changed. Threats appeared. He began stalking her. The young woman noticed him near her university, near the restaurant where she worked. He would stand off to the side, but in a way that she would see him. Then he began to threaten her openly. He managed to find out that his ex was living in her best friend's apartment, since Jiang couldn't refuse to help her. Information spreads quickly, especially among students from the same country. Now both of them were in danger. On the afternoon of November 2nd, 2016, the doorbell rang, sharply, insistently. Jiang was at work. Lu Xin was home. She immediately assumed it was the landlord. Maybe the neighbors had complained about the noise. Maybe someone had seen her coming in with keys. Panic seized the young woman. She knew her friend was forbidden from having anyone move in. Lu Xin sat quietly. She held her breath. She didn't open the door. The bell rang again, and again, and again. She called Jiang several times. The first time, she didn't pick up. She was in a meeting. The second time, she answered. Her voice was alarmed. What happened? Together, they came up with a story. She would pretend to be the tenant's sister, supposedly visiting for a couple of days. The plan seemed simple. She just had to be convincing. Then Lu Xin spoke to the uninvited guest through the door. Her voice trembled, but she tried to sound confident. She said in Japanese, "Who is it?" When he answered, she realized with horror that it was her ex-boyfriend, Chen. His voice was unmistakable. The young woman called her friend again and told her in a quick whisper. Jiang declared she would call the police immediately. But Lu Xin begged her not to. She was afraid they would both get into trouble, that the landlord would find out about her living there, that she would be evicted, that everything would fall apart. She never opened the door. Chen stood outside, ringing the bell, shouting threats through the thin door. Liu Xin pressed herself against the wall in the hallway and listened. Her heart pounded so loudly it felt like it could be heard outside. By 4:15 p.m., more than an hour had passed. The man still hadn't left. His voice was getting angrier. This greatly alarmed the young woman. Jiang came home from work early. Her boss had let her go after seeing how pale and distracted she was. A conflict erupted between them and Chen in the hallway. He demanded that Liu Xin come out. Jiang stood between him and the door, trying to speak calmly. She explained that Liu Xin didn't want to see him, that he needed to leave. The apartment door opened. Liu Xin joined the argument. The two women spoke at the same time, interrupting each other. It took the two friends more than half an hour to make the young man leave. He resisted, he argued, he threatened, but in the end, he turned and walked toward the stairs, slowly, looking back over his shoulder. Meanwhile, Jiang needed to go back to work to finish her shift. The project was urgent and deadlines were tight. And the other young woman was just about to leave for hers. Her shift at the restaurant started at 6 in the evening. They both got ready and left together. They locked the door with both locks, checked twice. They walked for about 10 minutes to the nearest subway station. They talked about ordinary things, trying to calm down. They had no idea that a stalker was watching them the entire time. He walked at a distance, hid behind corners, watched. When the friends parted ways, Jiang headed for her office, Liu Xin for the station that led to the restaurant. Chen continued to follow Liu Xin, no longer hiding now. He walked a few meters behind her. The young woman quickened her pace. He quickened his too. 4:43 p.m. The young man began sending his ex threatening messages, one after another. Liu Xin's phone screen flashed with notifications. She didn't read them, but she saw the first few words on her lock screen. He tried to scare her by threatening to send intimate photos to her parents if she didn't come back, that he would tell everyone what she was really like, that he would ruin her life. The young woman's hands trembled as she held her phone. Liu Xin arrived at her job at the restaurant by 6 in the evening. She went in through the staff entrance, changed into her uniform. Her hands were still shaking as she tied her apron. About an hour later, she happened to glance out the window and saw her ex standing outside the restaurant, waiting. Just standing on the other side of the street, staring at the entrance. He looked aggressive. His posture was tense. By this point, the young woman was so tired of being harassed by the unstable man that she turned to a larger colleague, a guy about 25 who worked in the kitchen and looked intimidating. She asked him to go outside with her to Chen and pretend to be her new boyfriend. She explained the situation quickly, haltingly. The colleague agreed. He didn't ask any unnecessary questions. They went out together. The colleague put his arm around Liu Xin's shoulders. Chen watched them from a distance. His face contorted. He stood there for another minute. Then he turned and walked away. Only then did the stalker leave. Lu Xin went back into the restaurant and finished her shift on autopilot. Her hands moved on their own. Her mind was somewhere else. However, about an hour later, Chen sent another message. Short, clear. If Lu Xin wouldn't be with him, he would make sure she wouldn't be with anyone. The young woman was scared. She read the message 3 times, but she didn't raise the alarm. She thought, empty threats. He's just angry. He'll get over it. After their shifts, the 2 friends called each other and headed home separately. It was already after midnight. The Tokyo subway was nearly empty. The anxiety from the day's events had not faded. Given the conflict with Chen, Lu Xin was the most worried. She feared her ex was still lying in wait for her, that he was waiting at her building, that it would start all over again. She even asked Jiang to wait for her at the subway station so they could walk home together. She was afraid to go alone. Jiang agreed immediately, no questions asked. She arrived earlier and was now waiting for her friend on the platform. To pass the time, Jiang contacted her mother and told her what a crazy day it had been. Her mother listened with concern. She said, "Maybe it's time to go to the police? This is serious now." But her daughter brushed it off. "It's fine, we'll handle it." Lu Xin, meanwhile, was riding to the station, continuing to receive one threat after another. Her phone vibrated incessantly in her pocket. She just hoped the stalker would finally calm down and back off after learning about her new relationship, that the photo with her colleague would work as proof. The young woman had no idea where Chen was actually sending all those messages from. He was very close, closer than she thought. Jiang waited for her friend for about an hour. She stood by the station exit, scrolling through her phone, texting her mother, looking at her watch. After midnight, they finally met. They hugged briefly, and they set off for home on foot, through the empty night streets, where sparse streetlights cast long shadows. According to the reconstruction of events, as they approached the building, Lu Xin said she urgently needed to use the restroom, and she ran ahead. Jiang followed, not rushing. She was tired from the day, lost in her own thoughts. Lu Xin went upstairs, unlocked the door with her key, and went into the apartment, closing the door behind her. Jiang was walking up the stairs behind her. She heard the lock click. Lu Xin was in the bathroom when she heard her friend's screams from outside the front door. Jiang's voice, loud, frightened, something demanding. Then a scream. The young woman ran out of the bathroom and tried to open the door to let Jiang in. She grabbed the handle, pulled it toward her, but she only managed to push the door open a little. About 5 centimeters, no more. After which something slammed it shut with force and held it. Lu Xin threw her whole weight against it. Useless. The door wouldn't budge. Someone was holding it from the outside. Someone stronger. Lu Xin looked through the pee-hole but saw nothing. It had long been broken. The landlord kept promising to fix it, but never got around to it. Instead of a glass lens, there was a black hole. For several minutes, Jiang screamed behind the door. Her voice was breaking. Her words were jumbled. Then another voice appeared, male, hoarse, angry. Lu Xin recognized it immediately. And her friend didn't know what to do. Panic seized her throat. Lu Xin knew it was her ex who was attacking Jiang. She shouted through the door, "Leave her alone! Please! It's not her! Let her go!" She begged the man to leave them alone, but he didn't seem to hear her pleas over Jiang's loud screams. Or he pretended not to hear. When the noise outside fell silent, Lu Xin decided to call the police. Finally. Her hands were shaking so much that she misdialed twice. She got through on the third try. The young woman gave the address. Her voice trembled. She reported that someone had attacked her best friend. The dispatcher asked questions in a calm, professional tone. Lu Xin answered haltingly. It was obvious that the attacker was Chen. But for some reason, the young woman initially claimed she didn't know the killer's identity. She told the dispatcher, "I don't know who it is, some man." This would later raise questions. It was later revealed that as soon as Lu Xin had driven her ex away from the restaurant where she worked, he had immediately gone to the apartment building where Jiang lived. He didn't go home. He didn't calm down. He went there. The stalker waited for the women on the third floor, while they themselves lived on the second. He chose a spot with a view of the entrance, sat down on the steps, took out a bottle of alcohol. There he drank, slowly, methodically, and continued to send angry, threatening messages. He stared at his phone screen, typed, sent, drank again. He was so angry that he craved retribution. He wanted to vent his aggression on the young women, on both of them. It didn't matter which one came first. According to the reconstruction, the ex-boyfriend didn't notice Lu Xin run into the building. She was indeed moving fast, almost sprinting up the stairs. She was saved by a miracle, as she was the primary target. He only saw Jiang approaching the building. Slowly, alone, tired after work. While Lu Xin was in the bathroom, her ex went down one floor and attacked her friend. He waited for her to reach the door. Jiang took out her keys, put them in the lock. At that moment, he stepped out of the shadows. Jiang once again tried to protect her friend. She stood between him and the door. She spoke loudly, demandingly. "Go away, right now. I'll call the police." An argument broke out. He stepped closer. She didn't back down. In the heat of the conflict, the young man pulled out a large knife. The blade glinted in the dim light of the hallway lamp. And he inflicted 12 stab wounds, one after another, methodically, in the neck, in the shoulders, in the chest. Jiang tried to defend herself with her hands. Deep cuts were left on them. Defensive wounds, as the forensic experts would later call them. And with a final slash, he slit her throat. A wide motion from left to right. The victim quickly lost her strength. Her legs gave out. She fell, grew quiet. Blood spread across the hallway floor, seeping into the cracks between the tiles. and the criminal simply fled, without looking back. He dropped the knife next to the body and ran down the stairs, leaving the young woman to bleed out. The prints of his sneakers were left in the blood on the steps. When Liu Xin contacted the police, she was told to stay in the apartment and not open the door. The instructions were clear. Lock all the locks. Don't open for anyone. Wait. The young woman readily complied. She slid the chain lock, sat down on the floor in the hallway, trembling. Outside the door, there was silence. A terrible silence. Paramedics and police officers arrived at the scene 15 minutes later. The sirens woke the neighbors. People peeked out of their doors. The police cordoned off the landing. They photographed the crime scene. They administered aid to the victim, doing everything they could right there on the cold hallway floor. Then they carefully transferred her to a stretcher and took her to the hospital. Despite the doctor's best efforts, at 2:25 a.m. on November 3, 2016, 24-year-old Jiang died from her injuries and subsequent blood loss. Her body couldn't take it. The blood loss was too great. Liu Xin was completely unharmed, not a scratch. It even looked suspicious, too suspicious. That same morning, she was taken to the police station, driven in a patrol car, and interrogated. A detective asked questions methodically, writing down her answers. She stated that she hadn't seen what exactly happened outside the door. She only heard the screams, because she couldn't open it, and the peephole still hadn't been fixed. The young woman was certain that her ex-boyfriend had been holding the door with his weight, which was why she simply didn't have the strength to push him away and help her friend. She repeated this several times. "I couldn't open it. He was holding the door. I tried, but I couldn't." Another witness, an elderly neighbor of the young women, had watched the suspicious young man gesturing wildly through her peephole. She had looked out after hearing the noise. The woman had only heard screams and seen him emotionally discussing something with the young woman. However, she didn't see him attack anyone. She didn't see a knife. She didn't see blood. Only the man's back and his flailing arms. When Jiang's mother was notified of her daughter's death, at first she didn't believe it at all. She simply refused to believe it. And she tried to call her, thinking it was some kind of mistake, that they had the wrong person, that her daughter would now answer in a sleepy voice, "Mom, what's wrong? Why are you calling so early?" But her daughter didn't pick up the phone. The subscriber is unavailable, again and again. When the mother called her daughter's friend and asked, "Liu Xin, what's going on? Why isn't my daughter answering?" The young woman replied that she was currently at the police station, and she refrained from giving details. Her voice was steady, too steady. "I'll call you back later," she said, and hung up. In fact, at that moment, she herself did not yet know that her friend had died. She was only informed of it several hours later, after the interrogation was over. When the police informed her, she acted so calmly. It was as if she were completely indifferent to Jiang's fate. The detective would later note it in his report: a suspicious lack of emotional reaction. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just nodded, said, "I see," and that was it. In the following days, Liu Xin never called the deceased's mother back. She didn't write. She didn't speak with the woman, who still couldn't calm down and was trying to get some kind of answers. She called time after time, sent messages. She was simply ignored. Liu Xin would read them, but not reply. Nearly a full day of silence passed before the young woman finally responded. Briefly, dryly, she would explain everything in detail later. But for now, she wanted to focus on helping the police catch the criminal. She needed to give a statement. Everything else could wait. This behavior and attitude from her daughter's friend outraged the victim's mother. After all, her daughter had saved her friend at the cost of her own life. She died protecting her. And she didn't even appreciate her sacrifice. She didn't even offer a word of condolence. The disgruntled woman published a post on the popular Chinese social network Weibo. It was a detailed, emotional post. She explained that her daughter had been killed by her friend Liu Xin's ex-boyfriend. She described all the details of the incident she knew, how her daughter had helped, how she had risked her life, how she had died. The reaction was mixed. On one hand, the public tried to support the woman who had lost her reason for living, her only daughter. The comments were filled with condolences. People also wanted to help advance the investigation. They shared the post. They wrote to the police. On the other hand, concerned citizens were outraged by Liu Xin's behavior. They believed she had some connection to what had happened, given how indifferent she was to her friend's death. And she didn't even try to help during the attack. She just stood behind the door and listened as the person who helped her was being murdered. Rumors and discussions of this case reached Liu Xin herself and her family. Her parents started receiving calls from journalists, from acquaintances, from strangers. This provoked a strong reaction from the young woman, who contacted the victim's mother. She wrote a message, asked her to stop the stream of publications with her name and all the details. "This is harassment," she wrote. "It's illegal." By this point, public opinion had already formed. They supported the woman and were set against Liu Xin. Hashtags with her name were gaining millions of views. Everyone was convinced that Chen was guilty. That was obvious. But a prejudice had also formed against Liu Xin, who was considered complicit, albeit indirectly. An accomplice by silence. Another day later, Liu Xin contacted Zhang's mother again. She wrote a long message, explained that she wasn't ready to meet with her yet. It was too difficult psychologically. She claimed she was afraid to reveal certain details of the attack until the killer was caught. What if he was following the news? What if something went wrong with the investigation? The deceased's mother was convinced this was just a sign of disrespect towards her and her daughter. Excuses. And she continued to act actively on the internet to draw attention to her story. She wrote posts every day. The woman was worried that the investigation into her daughter's death might stall in another country, that without public pressure, the case would be swept under the rug. That's why she tried to stir up a commotion, the biggest commotion possible. The inconsolable woman didn't want to stop. She couldn't. She continued to pressure Liu Xin, publicly, openly. Everything reached a critical point in less than a week. The young woman became so angry that she declared she would stop all cooperation with law enforcement if they didn't stop mentioning her on the internet. She wrote an official letter to the investigator. She threatened to retract her testimony. After this, Liu Xin's family contacted the mother directly. They called. They asked her to stop corresponding with strangers to whom she was detailing the circumstances of her daughter's death. They said it was obstructing the investigation, that it was slander. Then Liu Xin also began to personally address people on the internet. She created her own account, wrote long posts. She asked them for understanding and support, explained her position, complained about the harassment. However, trust in her had already been undermined. She was considered complicit in the murder, but no one really knew the details. There were only rumors, guesses, suspicions. Because of all this, she even refused to attend the cremation of her best friend, which took place on November 11. She said she was afraid of meeting the mother, afraid of journalists, afraid of judgment. This was the last straw for Zhang's mother. How could you not come to say goodbye to the person who saved you? Later, the young woman claimed online that she had actually been present at the ceremony, but she stayed further away, outside, to avoid facing journalists and not spoil the ceremony with her presence. But for some reason, no one saw her. Not a single person present. Strange, isn't it? Liu Xin did not want to communicate with the deceased friend's loved ones, which caused an even greater wave of condemnation. The comments under her posts became increasingly vicious. People wrote terrible things. All this time, the attacker, 25-year-old Chen, was wanted. His photograph was shown on the news. Wanted posters were put up. Surveillance cameras at train stations and airports were checked. He was only arrested on November 24, 3 weeks after the massacre. He was found in a cheap hotel on the outskirts of Tokyo. He did not resist arrest. He just silently held out his hands for the handcuffs. By this point, detectives had already discovered threatening messages the young man had been sending to his ex-girlfriend. Hundreds of messages, calls, voice notes. This was sufficient grounds for him to become the prime suspect from the first days of the investigation. There was no doubt. After a series of interrogations, long, exhausting ones, on December 14th, Chen was charged with the premeditated murder of Jiang. He sat in the interrogation room, staring at the table. He did not look up. Liu Xin and the mother, Diane, returned to China. The woman carried an urn with the ashes. Small, white, cold to the touch. She held it with both hands the entire way. She wanted to bury her daughter in their homeland, next to the graves of their ancestors. Since Chen had been caught, she decided that the case was now heading towards a resolution, and Liu Xin would tell everything. Finally, explain. Finally, meet. However, even now, the young woman continued to ignore requests to meet. She did not answer calls. She blocked messages. The woman celebrated the Lunar New Year in an empty house, alone. On the table stood a framed photograph of her daughter, candles, the food her daughter loved, traditional offerings for the spirits of ancestors. She was trying to cope with the pain of her loss. She sat at the table and talked to the photograph. It seemed she was about to lose all hope for justice. In the midst of the holidays, while other families were celebrating, setting off fireworks, the victim's mother felt a sense of resolve, a strange, cold resolve, to get justice for her daughter, by any means necessary, at any cost. In May 2017, the tension between Liu Xin and Dian Chulien began to escalate again. The young woman still avoided contact. The mother could not accept this. Because of this, the woman resorted to extreme measures. She publicly posted all the information she knew about Liu Xin's family and the young woman herself, including their home address in Qingdao and her parents' phone numbers. The post was angry, accusatory, demanding an answer, a plea not to remain silent. Concerned citizens reacted immediately. Within a few hours, that same day, Liu Xin's family received a wave of insults and threats. The calls started in the morning and didn't stop until night. Some sent messages, some came to their house, shouted under their windows. Because of this, they even contacted the bereaved mother. Liu Xin's father called. His voice trembled with anger. They began to threaten a lawsuit for harassment, for slander, for inciting hatred. But the victim's mother no longer cared. What did she have to lose? She only wanted to get justice for her daughter. Nothing else mattered. The friend's parents were so tired of the constant pressure, the calls and the threats, that Liu Xin's mother even declared in anger during one conversation, maybe it was Jiang's fate to live a short life. Maybe it was predestined. Maybe nothing could have been changed. The woman could not bear such an insult. The words burned like acid. So, by August 2017, she continued to actively hand out flyers on the street, every day. In the morning at the subway, in the afternoon at shopping malls, in the evening at universities, to draw public attention to the tragedy and force Liu Xin to speak up and testify against Chen in court. The flyers were simple but effective: a photograph of her daughter, a brief description of what happened, and the information about Liu Xin's family that had been published online. Names, addresses, numbers, with a call to phone them and demand answers. Apparently, Dian Chulien's efforts were not in vain. The pressure was working. Because Liu Xin finally agreed to a personal meeting with her best friend's mother by the end of August. She wrote herself, set a date, a place. She recounted the story of the murder and everything she knew in detail. The meeting was broadcast live at the mother's initiative. Cameras, microphones, journalists. Liu Xin sat opposite her, pale, with her arms crossed over her chest. She spoke quietly. She averted her gaze. The woman did not apologize for the information campaign she had organized. On the contrary, she stated directly to the camera that she couldn't understand why such an important witness had remained silent for so long and ignored her, that it looked suspicious, that an honest person has nothing to hide. The victim's mother simply wanted to know how her daughter's last moments had passed, what she felt, what she thought, because she couldn't find peace of mind without these answers. Despite Liu Xin's apology, And she did apologize, saying she was sorry for how things turned out. The woman did not forgive her. She couldn't. In the mother's opinion, she behaved too coldly towards a person who had helped her so much, sheltered her, risked herself for her, and then even gave her life. And Lu Xin didn't even come to the funeral, didn't even shed a tear. After the live broadcast, Diane turned her focus to the criminal. She had a new goal. She began a massive campaign for the death penalty, collected signatures, organized rallies. The woman returned to Tokyo for this. She sold her last valuables to pay for accommodation. And by December, when the hearings were scheduled, she had managed to collect a colossal number, 4.5 million signatures from Chinese and Japanese people in support of the initiative for capital punishment. The boxes of papers took up several tables in the courtroom. At the hearings, a different version of events was presented, told by Chen during his interrogations. His lawyer, a young man in an expensive suit, read out the testimony. According to the defendant, he had been following the young women late that evening from the subway station. He didn't hide. He walked openly. They started running as soon as they noticed him. Lu Xin was faster, younger, more athletic. The young woman reached the apartment first and used her key, then locked the door behind her. The lock clicked. She did not let Zhang in, who immediately got into an altercation with him on the landing. Chen insisted he was just holding her against the wall, not harming her. He was trying to get through to his ex-girlfriend through the door, yelling for Lu Xin to come out, to talk. And when he realized that Lu Xin was not going to open the door, and, judging by the sound of her voice behind the door, was calling the police, he flew into a fit of rage, lost control, and began stabbing Jiang. He just snapped, couldn't stop. Then this story began to change. Right during the hearings, when the prosecutor started asking uncomfortable questions, Chen suddenly declared, in a voice full of confidence, that the knife that killed the young woman did not actually belong to him, but that the victim herself had pulled out her own weapon and attacked him first, tried to cut him, defended herself aggressively. Now he was trying to attribute her death to exceeding self-defense. "I was just defending myself," he said. "I took the knife. It was her own fault." Naturally, 12 stab wounds, deep, penetrating, defensive injuries on the victim's hands, and a slit throat did not look like an attempt to fend off an attack. The forensic experts confirmed this. The nature of the wounds indicated targeted aggression, a desire to kill. As evidence, the prosecution used the threatening messages. They were displayed on a large screen in the courtroom, each message read aloud, as well as surveillance camera footage. Although the young man had carefully prepared and analyzed how to avoid being caught on camera, Chen didn't manage to completely protect himself. A camera on a neighboring building recorded him entering the apartment building. Another camera showed him running out a few minutes later. His face was clear. a 100% match. Then the defendant's story changed yet again at the third hearing. Now he added a new, strange detail, the one that caused a real shock in the courtroom. According to the young man, Liu Xin had simply run into the apartment first and locked herself in. That was true. But in fact, Jiang had not lagged behind her either. They had run in almost together, ran side by side up the stairs. But his ex, and here he paused, looked directly at the camera, had deliberately pushed her friend into the hallway before locking the door, used her as a shield, as a sacrifice. The defendant insisted he had not tried to block the door and keep Jiang outside. On the contrary, it was in his interest to get to Liu Xin specifically. She was the target. He wanted to talk to her. Jiang had just been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Later, Jiang's mother told journalists that this was why she had pursued her daughter's friend for so long. Not out of revenge, not out of malice. She had subconsciously felt, with a mother's instinct that cannot be deceived, that her daughter's best friend was not telling the whole story, that she was hiding something important. On December 20, 2017, Chen Shifeng was sentenced to 20 years in prison. The trial took place in Tokyo in a packed courtroom. The jury found him guilty unanimously. All 12 people raised their hands without hesitation. There could be no doubt of his guilt, given the amount of evidence against him. After serving his sentence, he is expected to be deported back to China, where he may face additional charges. For now, he continues to serve his time behind bars in a Japanese prison, in a solitary cell, under close supervision. Interestingly, the death penalty, for which the victim's mother had fought so fiercely, was never seriously considered as a punishment for him. The judge explained this calmly, in an almost apologetic tone. The death penalty does exist in Japan, that's true, but it is applied extremely rarely, as a rule against psychopaths and serial killers at whose hands several people have died, 3 or more. Chen had 1 victim. By Japanese standards, this did not warrant capital punishment, as monstrous as that may sound. During the investigation, another unpleasant detail was uncovered. Liu Xin was not the young man's only victim in the past. He was obsessed with control and manipulation. This was his pattern of behavior in all his relationships. Detectives found 2 ex-girlfriends who told similar stories: stalking, threats, attempts to isolate them from friends, physical violence. This was why all his previous relationships ended. He could only be stopped after repeated reports to law enforcement. One of the young women obtained a temporary restraining order. The other moved. However, the story did not end there. It seemed the verdict was in. The killer was behind bars. The case could be closed. But no. In February 2018, Diane Shulian received an unexpected message from Liu Xin. It was the first time she had heard from her since that scandalous live broadcast meeting. 6 months of silence, and suddenly, a message. The young woman sent greetings for the Lunar New Year, wished her prosperity, health, happiness. The text clearly stated that she wished prosperity specifically for Diane's family. Wishing your family, that's how the message began. Diane Shulian took this as a cynical insult, a mockery. After all, the only member of her family, her only daughter, her reason for living, the reason she woke up in the mornings, had been brutally murdered in Japan, and Liu Xin could have had a direct connection to it, at least an indirect one. Of this, the woman was certain. The woman wrote this openly to the young woman. She didn't hold back. She poured out everything that had built up. They started a conflict via messages, harsh, without any nuance. Messages flew back and forth, each one more vicious than the last. Even this wasn't the end of the story, because on that same day, in the evening, after it had grown dark, a package was delivered to the woman. A courier brought a box. The sender, Liu Xin. The woman opened it. Inside was food. The young woman had sent her duck neck and pigeon meat, vacuum sealed, neat, expensive, with a note, a holiday treat. To understand the full depth of the mockery, one must consider the cultural context. In China, any gift is highly symbolic. Every detail has meaning. The woman immediately saw a frightening, cruel subtext in it. The fact is, her daughter's name, Zhang, sounded almost identical to the word for pigeon in Chinese. The same tones, almost the same phonetics. Furthermore, and this was the most horrifying part, the fatal wound for Zhang was precisely to her neck. 12 blows, the last of which slit her throat. Therefore, the duck neck in the package seemed like more than just a coincidence. It was a message, a mockery of her grief. All of this resembled a genuine, calculated torment of a woman who had lost everything. When Dan Chulian wrote to Liu Xin about this, angrily demanding an explanation, Liu Xin continued the insults openly, without hints, in plain text. She wrote that the mother herself was to blame for her daughter's death, that if not for her ambitions, the girl would have stayed in China, that it was karma, that she should accept it and finally leave her alone. Paradoxically, the campaign against Liu Xin's family, led by Dian, even worked in the young woman's favor. If before, thanks to the woman's aggressive actions, Liu Xin was hated by practically the entire Chinese internet, now, after a year of harassment, after the publication of her personal data, after constant pressure, people began to listen to her. There was a reverse effect, and she even found a support group that genuinely sympathized with her. They saw her as a victim of an obsessive mother who couldn't accept the tragedy and was looking for someone to blame. In 2018, Liu Xin was actively communicating online with one of her most loyal supporters. She had long exchanges with him, shared details, and in one of these conversations, she revealed a completely new, previously unknown detail of the Zhang case. As it turned out, on that fateful evening when her friend was being murdered behind the door, she wasn't just waiting for the police. She had called a lawyer for a consultation. While she was waiting for law enforcement to arrive, while Zhang was possibly still alive and bleeding out in the hallway, Liu Xin was calling a lawyer, asking what she should do, what her rights were, what her obligations were.
This seemed extremely strange against the backdrop of her own claims that she didn't know what had happened to her friend behind the closed door, that she hadn't seen, that she had only heard screams but didn't understand how serious it was. If you don't know what happened, why call a lawyer? People call relatives, friends, but not lawyers, not first. Thanks to her continued online activity and the gradual exposure of new details of the tragedy, Lu Xin even gained a certain popularity. She became, as they say now, an influencer. She had the opportunity to earn money from her blog, sponsorship contracts, donations from fans, advertising. The young woman monetized her tragedy.
Furthermore, she began, cautiously at first, then more and more openly, to provoke her supporters into harassing Diane's mother, with hints, reposts, comments like, "You yourself understand who the real aggressor is here." The young woman's account was even temporarily blocked by the administration due to numerous complaints on this basis. At the end of 2018, Lu Xin permanently lost access to it for inciting hatred. The platform deleted the account for good. Two of the young woman's most ardent supporters, young men who wrote particularly cruel comments, went to prison. Short sentences, 6 months each, for systematic insults against Diane Julien, for threats, for doxing. The online harassment campaign against the woman was so intense and dangerous that the mother even had to officially change her name through the court with new documents and move to another city, rent an apartment under a different name. Her neighbors didn't know her story, and she kept silent, simply trying to survive day by day. But the mother never calmed down, never accepted it. In 2021, 5 years after the tragedy, she went to court. She filed a civil lawsuit to raise the question of the best friend's culpability in her daughter's death. Since the criminal proceedings had long since ended and had taken place in Japan, the woman could only file a civil lawsuit in China to demand financial compensation for moral damages, claiming that the young woman was partially responsible for the murder, that her actions, or inaction, had led to Zhang's death. When the trial began, Lu Xin did not appear in court for the first hearing. She sent a lawyer. But this didn't even affect the course of the proceedings. The judge ordered it to continue without her. By this point, investigative authorities had discovered records of the phone calls Lu Xin made that evening. Technical experts recovered the data. For the most part, the conversations were ambiguous, hard to hear. But the general context of the dialogue boiled down to Lu Xin trying to drive away people, specifically people in the plural. "Go away," she said. "Leave us alone." Who was she saying this to? Zhang's lawyer, an experienced jurist with 30 years of experience, immediately drew the court's attention to a critical detail. She was speaking Chinese. This seemed extremely strange, because the young woman had repeatedly claimed she didn't know who was behind the door, that it could have been anyone, the landlord, a neighbor, the police, anyone. But it was perfectly clear that she was addressing her compatriots, Chinese people. She knew who was there. She knew from the very beginning.
Considering the friends had lived in Japan for years, it would have been absolutely logical to address an unknown person at the door in Japanese. That would have been the natural choice. But she chose Chinese. Why?
In the end, on January 10th, 2022, a date Zhang's mother will remember forever, the Chinese court ruled Lu Xin was indeed partly to blame for her best friend's murder. She had not adequately warned her of the threat. She knew her ex was stalking her, knew he was dangerous, but she did not insist on going to the police. She did nothing to truly save her friend in the critical moment. Following the trial, the court confirmed that the defendant could indeed have intentionally locked herself in the apartment and prevented her friend from entering, knowing the aggressor was outside. Circumstantial evidence, reaction time, the nature of her actions, the lack of any attempt to force the door open pointed to this. The young woman was fined about 700,000 yuan. At the time, this was approximately $100,000, a huge sum. Lu Xin was outraged by the court's decision. Her lawyer read a statement, unfair, based on emotions, not facts, and she immediately filed an appeal. The process dragged on for several more months. 6 months later, the case was reviewed. Now, finally realizing the full seriousness of the situation, the young woman even came to the hearing in person for the first time ever. She sat on the defendant's bench, answered questions, cried, swore she had tried to help. Despite this, despite the tears, the excuses, the psychologist's testimony about post-traumatic stress, the verdict was upheld. The appeal was denied. The sum was confirmed, 700,000 yuan. To pay the fine, Liu Xin turned to her supporters online. She created a crowdfunding campaign, asking to raise money because she had been unjustly accused, because she was also a victim, because she needed help. It worked better than could have been expected. The campaign she launched brought the young woman a large sum in a matter of weeks. People transferred small amounts, some 100 yuan, some 1,000, but not the whole amount, about half of what was needed. The young woman raised the remaining funds with her family's help. Her parents sold their car, took out loans, mortgaged their house. By the end of 2022, Dayang Chulian had received the full amount of compensation. The money was transferred to her account. She looked at the numbers on the screen and felt nothing. Emptiness. Money wouldn't bring her daughter back. But it was something. And the woman did what her daughter would have done. She donated most of it, almost 600,000 yuan, to a charitable organization that helps low-income families support their children in getting a higher education. The program was called Dreams for the Future. She did this because it was the very organization her daughter had volunteered with while she was still living in China. Before moving to Tokyo, Zhang spent her weekends there, helping to fill out grant applications and teaching children to draw. Later, the woman spoke with journalists many times, gave interviews, appeared in documentary programs. But she continued to say the same thing. She was as inconsolable as she had been on the first day. The pain never went away. Time does not heal. That's a myth. But she was satisfied that she had been able to achieve some small measure of justice for her daughter. At least something. Chen will be released from prison in 2037. By then, he will be over 45. Still young enough. He can start over if he wants to. Jiang's mother does not intend to give up. She plans to fight the criminal using the same method she has already perfected, the tactic that worked with Liu Xin. The woman plans to file a civil lawsuit against him in China as soon as he is deported and back in his homeland. She will demand compensation, a huge amount, the maximum allowed by law. And the sum received, if she receives it, she intends to donate entirely to charity, to the same foundation, so that other children, other Jiangs, can realize their dreams. So that at least something good can come out of this nightmare. And she will wait, as long as it takes. 15 years is no time at all for a mother who has lost everything.